Welcome back to the Marvel Movie Minute, a daily podcast in which we assemble to explore the films of the Marvel Cinematic Universe 1 minute at a time. In this, our 6th season, we are looking at the Avengers. I'm Andy Nelson from the Next Reel Film Podcast.
And I'm Pete Wright, and today we get to talk about Loki's magical stick.
Today we're talking about Minute 56, which begins with big science talk and ends with the Helicarrier at night. Back on the show, it's Bubbawheat from the It's Time to Rewind podcast. Hello, Bubbawheat.
Hey, it's good to be back.
We are thrilled to have you back. This next set of minutes, we're going to have you for 56 through 59. So a nice solid chunk. What was the particular reason that you selected this chunk of minutes?
Well, I selected him for a couple different reasons. I think the main reason why I picked this chunk was whenever I was kind of flipping through the Avengers, I haven't seen it since, I think, 2012, maybe 2013. And so I remember enjoying it as a whole, but I couldn't pick out any specific points other than, some of the, very brief moments of the highlights. And then I remember that this moment with the Galaga. And so I picked that because, for my day job, I do work at an arcade, and I have worked in the arcade business for about 20 years now. So I thought that was nice. And then I gave you a chunk of minutes just because as somebody who's done this myself, I know the headache of the additional scheduling. So for your benefit and mine, I was like, I'll just pick, a nice solid chunk of minutes, even though they said I could split it up. And then I do have one other minute,
right.
I guess spoiler, I picked the Stan Lee cameo.
Gotcha. Well, that's so thoughtful of you. Thank you so much.
So thoughtful.
As, behind the scenes, it definitely does require a little more work on the scheduling side to be running the show this way. Although it is allowing for a lot of interesting conversations. So sometimes confusing conversations as we record, sometimes minutes out of order. But you know what? It's okay. It's all part of the fun. It's all part of the fun.
Yeah, I just in the middle of recording a season where I think our sessions have wildly been out of order.
Oh yeah, that's the Memento?
Yes.
Yeah. We had a lot of fun talking with you on that one, so definitely looking forward to hearing the rest of the show. Well, we're coming in to this conference table as the group is talking. Tony had just arrived, a little over a minute ago. And he and Bruce start kind of having this little nerd talk. They really kind of go into this heavy science conversation. No one else is understanding what they're talking about. In the last minute, Banner had talked about heating the cube up to 120 million Kelvin, and he finishes here just to break through the Coulomb barrier. And then Tony replies about the quantum tunneling effect, and then Banner brings up the heavy ion fusion. And it's a very funny little bit of science here that is actually pretty accurate. I thought that was kind of fun to do some research on this minute about all this. How does this play for the two of you as far as like the developing relationship between our two scientists here?
I like it because I think with different actors, it could come off as almost, a Johnson measuring contest. But I feel like with the two of these guys, it feels like there's no hint of, superiority to everybody else, but it's not like they're trying to one up each other. I feel like they feel like each other are at the same level, and they feel like that's especially Tony Stark is someone that doesn't experience that very often because he feels like everybody's below him, and so talking to someone who he feels like is an intellectual equal is a nice change of pace. And I feel like it is truly like this camaraderie that he's trying to build.
Yeah, I think so too. I think it's the finally someone who speaks English bit. I think that's really great. And but it gives us this the banter between them to toss back and forth between science talk and human talk. I get that reference. Like, that's a callback to a great joke, and it's a joke that will continue to pay dividends. And I love it to watch all of the personalities and egos kind of normalize around this table. I think it makes for a really neat scene.
Yeah, it really does. Going into the science a little bit, I just wanted to translate this. I found this on this website, Neuronium on Tumblr, on the neocortical element. They did this whole write-up about this whole thing about the Tesseract and being used the way that they're describing here. And it kind of breaks down a little bit of this whole thing, which is, it was really interesting to read the way that it's all described here in this whole process of nuclear fusion and the Coulomb barrier. It really kind of goes into all that. The Coulomb barrier, there's a Coulomb force that keeps charged nuclei from getting close enough to each other to collide and fuse together. And so they have to get through the barrier in order to do that. And that creates that nuclear fusion. And so this article kind of breaks down the whole thing, and I'm not going to go into the whole thing because it's there's quite a bit, but just I'm going to read this last paragraph here because I think it highlights it pretty well. To return to Selvig's plan, he needs to heat the cube up to 120 million Kelvin to break through the Coulomb barrier needed to fuse the nuclei of atoms inside the cube and generate energy to activate the Tesseract. Bruce Banner and Tony Stark figure that only a small number of nuclear reactors are able to carry out a nuclear reaction that requires that much amount of heat and initial energy, such as one of Stark Industries. This became an advantage in narrowing down the possible locations of the Tesseract, in addition to Banner's approach by tracing its electromagnetic radiation. The exception to this rule would be if Selvig is able to coax particles inside the cube to undergo the quantum tunneling process, which means that the fusion process could happen in lower temperatures and can be carried out in more common nuclear reactors. Even reading that sounds...
But Dr. Nelson, how does that apply to me? Will I ever break the Coulomb barrier?
I mean, I don't know all about that, but I did read an article and I found it again just this past December. For the first time in the U.S., they had a nuclear fusion reactor core that produces more energy than it consumes, which is a massive breakthrough in nuclear fusion because up to this point, typically the energy required to get to that million Kelvin takes more energy than they create from the nuclear fusion reaction. The article was December 13th of just this past year. And that was the first time that they did that because they're using different techniques in terms of like insulation in order to keep the heat from leaking out, basically.
Yeah, and it's interesting because they also have not quite figured out how to do it for a longer period. Like, I think when they did that, they could only sustain it for about 20 seconds or so. So they still have a ways to go, but at least they're advancing. And that's kind of, it's kind of exciting to see how the process continues to evolve.
Yeah.
And all of this science. Pretty soon we'll all have our own little Tesseract sitting in our kitchen, and we'll be able to use it to run the dishwasher.
Dare to dream.
Well, okay. So the other thing that Bruce says, or that Tony says to Bruce, is after they've met, your work on anti-electron collisions is unparalleled, which is more science, and I'm not going to get into this one, but it deals with the process of annihilation, which I just liked that that's actually the process name. But it deals with subatomic particle collisions. And I'm like, of course it's called annihilation, because that just sounds so perfect.
That's what they do. That's
and
what they do.
Not creepy bears with human voices.
Yeah, right.
What all of this is, though, I mean, it is really this great meet cute between these two scientists, and it's really fun. And
that's an awesome way to put it. That's exactly what it is to scientists meet cute. Well done. Oh my God.
And what is great about it is after they have this moment and they bond, then Steve is like, is that what just happened? Like, you can tell, like, their talk is like so far above everyone else. It's pretty clever. It's pretty fun. And also, I think the other thing that we get out of this, though, is that there's a meet cute, but at the same time, Tony is going to be pushing at Bruce quite a bit here. And the first thing he says, I'm a huge fan of the way you lose control and turn into an enormous green rage monster. And we're going to kind of see how that kind of continues as he continues poking, sometimes literally, and prodding at Bruce to try to kind of get a rise out of him. And to get a read on him, he'll say later, strutting versus tiptoeing and all of that. And it's interesting that this, like right out of the gate, he is fascinated by the other side of Bruce that he's not going to get to see for a while. But I think it's an interesting way that he plays this. And I'm curious from the two of you, where do you read Tony's desire to kind of continue needling and pushing at Bruce? Because, as Tony will say later, it's like, you're putting everyone in this ship at risk. I mean, how do you think Tony sees this?
Well, I think it's really his egotistical and reckless scientific curiosity. He is curious for curious sake, and he thinks that he personally can handle it, and he doesn't care about whether or not anybody else can handle the situation.
I don't know. I mean, I think there's probably a part of him that understands that there is risk involved with his needling. I don't think he can help it. Like, he just feels like a guy who cannot resist the urge to poke, right? That's all we've seen him do is poke at stuff and then have Jarvis build a robot that addresses that poking. Like, this is his stock and trade. It's all he does.
Yeah.
It's like putting a kid in the room with a sign that says, "Do not press this button."
Tony is a walking, talking example of a perpetual failure of the marshmallow test, right? That's what he is. Always failing the marshmallow test.
Always. I do like the way that it plays, and I think it is interesting. I think it does say a lot about his personality, and we'll be talking about that quite a bit over the next week or so.
Yeah.
I do want to point out Coulson did not leave. I thought it was strange in a couple minutes ago when Tony and Coulson arrive, and Tony jumps into the conversation, and Coulson just walks out of frame and completely seemed to disappear from the scene. I'm like, I guess he left? Well, no. In fact, he's actually just standing on the far side of the room now. He's just back there listening, not really involved in the conversation.
He's so shifty. He's like standing back there with papers. It's like he has been dodging the eye line of the camera the whole time. Like, he's been there, like, on his knees, crawling around. That's what I imagine Clark Gregg doing on set.
Well, I didn't quite go there, but sure. Yeah. He just got up right before we see him at about second 17. He had just stood up after collecting all the papers that he accidentally dropped over there. That's what he's doing. All right. And Fury finally shows up. I did joke a few minutes ago at this table about, like, why shouldn't Fury be here? It seems like a conversation Fury should be involved in, completely forgetting the fact that he was just at Loki's cell and is still kind of probably moving from Loki's cell back up to here as everybody is having this conversation. So he finally arrives, though. And, this is kind of the moment where we're really getting all of these people working together, having this conversation about trying to figure out what's going on about the cube and what their next steps are. And then we have Steve piping in with, I'd start with that stick of his, which, does that seem like verbiage that Steve would say? Does it seem very, very...
I think it does. I could totally see him in 1940 saying, "Hey, everybody, get the stick." Doesn't it seem like, well, that's of course not what he sounded like in 1945.
I'm not sure where you're going there.
Hey, you, hey. Hey, buckaroo.
He's turned into a 30s newsreel voice.
Grab the alien stick. It just feels like a stick. It feels like a word that like, what other word does he have?
It's like what you used to play stickball with it.
Yeah, exactly. And because I'll tell you what is not a word that fits for Steve, like, it just substitutes scepter in that line. And does that make it better?
I don't know. For somebody whose brain has grown and is supposed to be like so clever and smart now, like when he just says, "I'd start with that stick of his," it doesn't, I don't know. From my perspective, it sounds like a lot more dismissively or purposefully dismissive or naive about it. Like, it sounds strange as talking about your enemy to be talking about it that way. I don't know. It struck me as peculiar, but maybe I'm just wanting to read more into it than I really should be.
Well, I don't want you to feel bad, man, but I think you might be.
Well, I do think that stick would be better than, spear or scepter, like Pete said, coming out of Captain America's mouth. Maybe I could see him saying weapon instead, but I think stick is a decent choice.
All right, fine. You two can have this one. But we do get this comment from him that it works an awful lot like a hydro weapon. This is coming from a person who has seen hydro weapons. He was shot at with the scepter by Loki in Stuttgart. It very much kind of has the blue pew-pew powers. And I don't know. I guess I wanted to chat with you both. How does this work for you? I mean, we've talked about it a little bit before because obviously he's been doing this since pretty much the beginning of the film. But now we, very specifically have a call out to the last film and the Tesseract energy, which is Space Stone energy, being used in a way that shoots with those weapons. But now it's the Mind Stone energy, which is essentially also blue pew-pew energy. Do you like the way this works?
I think they say it in this minute. Nick Fury says that it's powered by the Tesseract. So if that is true, then you could argue that it's the Mind Stone being powered up by the Tesseract, and so that's why it basically has the blue Tesseract energy coating, and that's why it's shooting the Tesseract energy instead of behaving more like the Mind Stone. And the Tesseract energy just allows it to do extra mind thing. Like Loki knows its true power, and so he can use the Mind Stone in the center of it on occasion to mind control the people to work for him. But it's, for the most part, it's covered in the blue Tesseract energy to use as, a more typical weapon.
I have to just say, for the record, may it please the court, I love that we have canonized the blue pew-pew energy. Like, that just rolled off your tongue so effortlessly. I live for that. I don't.
There's one thing that we love to get on this show.
Yes,
the canonization of blue pew-pew
energy. Yes, that is what they have made of the confusion between the Mind Stone and the Tesseract. So you may go from there.
It's I struggle with it. I'm glad you brought up that other line, Bubbawheat, about that Fury says that it's powered by the cube, because I was like, it feels like a very written line, a very kind of misleading line that they needed to throw in here just to kind of keep us not thinking about it, and perhaps also to future retroactively cover up the fact that it's not actually involved with the Tesseract at all, but is a totally different Infinity Stone.
That also sets up the finale, like how they solve this problem.
Right. But all of it feels so speculative on their part. Like how does he know that it's powered by the cube? Like, all of this seems a little
because it's blue.
Yeah, well, yeah, right. It's like anything that's blue. Oh my goodness, that just leads to all sorts of problems. But yeah, I mean, I guess maybe that is the way that he's reading it. It all of this ends up feeling a little too written for me, just to kind of keep the story moving.
Or because they both have the the subtle gamma radiation that Banner's able to trace.
Right, which we don't know yet. We only know that at this point that the Tesseract has gamma radiation. We won't find out that the Scepter does until a few minutes from now, when Bruce and Tony are off studying it up in the lab. But I mean, yes, absolutely, there is that commonality that we will learn about. So I mean, yeah, they're figuring this stuff out. I guess I struggle a little bit about the way that the scene is constructed.
I think that's a really good observation, and it's a challenge with these kinds of movies. And as we record this, right, we're on the day that New York Times film critic A.O. Scott retires from film criticism because he's tired of franchises. Like it all of his arguments about why movies suck today, and he's not going to review them anymore for the Times, they come right back into this, like into this sort of, we can't write sophisticated stories anymore that tell complex sciencey future stuff without it feeling written. And I wonder, and I should say, I'm obviously I'm a bull on this movie. I have a great time with the movie. I wonder if writing less would actually communicate more. Right? They write so much sciencey language that gives us, I feel like, too many opportunities to question, when really being a little bit more hand-wavy about it might actually serve the story better. Hypothesis.
That's possible. I also just think that they probably could have found ways to make this story work without having to have jumped through as many hoops as they did to create this connection, to create the scepter that's also blue that eventually won't be blue. It seems
that's
like
kind of what I mean, right? Like, it's overcomplicated.
Yeah, I guess if that's what you're saying, yeah, I feel like then there probably is some sense of overcomplication in the way that they crafted this, just to have these tools here. And yeah, and I mean, the team behind this, there's certainly people who could, I mean, we know they can put together complicated stories. I just wonder if it was at this point where they're like, you know what, I think that's going to be fine. Let's just go with that. And I mean, it's not like everyone has all the time in the world to come up with these things. Eventually they have to,
right,
put the camera down and start filming. So,
well, and as we keep running into with this movie, it's not as if everyone expects an audience of podcasters to litigate every line in the script 1 minute at a time.
Yeah. And, and to a certain extent, I mean, obviously we're here, we're having fun, having these conversations about all of this. And yeah, I mean, the point of a film is to not watch it 1 minute at a time and break it down, but to watch it in one fell swoop and just kind of let it flow over you. But I don't know, personally, oftentimes these are questions that you end up talking about afterward. And it's like, well, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
And so that's, I guess, what I'm getting to is like some of these issues, it's hard to let go of them because they kind of are perpetual issues.
Perpetual and central to what gets us into the next sequence. Like, this perpetuates the chase, right? I mean, this is what leads us into the next thing. And, so it's important to the degree to which you can step away from it and believe it so that you believe the action to come. And for me, it works, but I can totally see how it might stop you.
Yeah, right. Well, we go from this conversation about the Hydra weapon and being powered by the cube and all that, and talking about the mind control, which is getting this sense from Fury about how Loki used it to turn two of the sharpest men that he knows into his personal flying monkeys. That's a fun little reference, Wizard of Oz, in here that he throws out, and Thor, of course, has no idea, but Steve does. Steve gets it. This is a really fun beat. And Pete, you had mentioned the other point when this was calling back to, right?
Well, just that this is a fun thing that we know about Steve, that this is an element for him to feel like he's catching up to the present. And I think that works. Like, we get multiple beats across the franchise, I think, of him getting stuff and understanding and feeling like he's catching up. And I like that.
And I also think that there is this little bit of understanding between Steve and Thor, because like Steve sees Thor looking around like he doesn't understand what the reference is, and I'm sure Steve has felt that exact same way many times throughout these past 6 months did you say that he's been frozen?
7 months, yeah.
7 months,
7, yeah.
So I think he sees Thor looking around and he's like, I know exactly how he feels, but hey, I know that reference. I know the Wizard of Oz.
That's a good point. If Fury, on the other hand, had said, turn into his personal flying bilge snipes, then that would have been right up Thor's alley.
Also, I happen to know that bilge snipe is now your spirit animal. So I think we've come a long way, baby.
We've come a long way. The other thing about this moment is when Steve says he gets that reference, Tony has like the best eye roll. Like, it is so funny to see his reaction to Steve, because it's so dismissive of like, oh God, this guy. It's such a funny way that they're painting his impressions of Captain America. Like he is so dated. He is so of my dad's era, and there's nothing cool about him. I don't know. It really makes me laugh the way that they're playing this relationship, or the way that Tony's reading it. I mean, how do you two see this?
It really is. Tony just like, okay, good on you, old man.
Yeah,
exactly it.
Well, and it's yet another reference, like as we think about Tony and his relationship with his dad. Like, it's you kind of can't let that go. This is the guy my dad couldn't shut up about. Like, we have Tony feeling resentful about him. He just met the guy, right? I mean, he just really just a few minutes ago, it feels like, just met the guy, and now he's already, dealing with him. I think it's great.
Yeah. As Tony and Bruce, after that little bit, they decide to go play, and they walk out. That's the end of the scene. But we do get a cutaway to Galaga Guy, and we see that he is now that Tony is left, he goes back to his computer and he switches his screen back to play a little more Galaga. It's just fantastic.
Which I love this on several different levels. On one, I believe I read that the Galaga line was a one-off, and you can kind of tell that this was probably a pickup shot because there are no primary actors in the scene.
Right.
It really is just a close-up of the extra switching to Galaga. So it does feel like something that they could have added in afterwards to fit with the line, which could have been an improvisation from Robert Downey Jr. And this also ties into a little bit of my own personal Mandela effect, because whenever I knew you guys were going to do the Avengers, I remember hearing on a podcast with someone that's within my podcast circle who tells this story about how he was the extra standing next to how he was an extra in this scene, and how he was next to the guy playing Galaga. So it was like kind of a prime spot, like not on camera because you don't see the guy sitting next to the guy playing Galaga, but that would be like prime to experience the filming of it. And I could have sworn in my head that it was this one person that I knew. And I reached out to him, and he messaged me back, and he's like, no, that wasn't me. I would have loved to have been there, but that was not me. And like, I was trying to rack my head, and like, I reached out to a few other people in my podcast circles, and none of them remembered this story. So I could not find it anywhere. I have no idea if this is just a story that I completely imagined, or if it is a real story, but I just could not find the person that I heard this story from. So
that's funny.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, since we're here at Galaga, and it's close to the end of the minute, well, this was the reason you picked it. Is there something about Galaga in particular? Are you a fan of Galaga? Where does that fall in your roster of video game fandom?
I mean, Galaga, it's always, I think it's still one of the, the top 3 or top 5 classic video games of all time. It's right up there with like Miss Pac-Man and like Space Invaders and Frogger. And the arcades do still make new versions of it. Like in one of the arcades that I work now, we have a current arcade cabinet of Galaga, which is, it's slightly updated graphics. Like it's still got the pixelated version, but it's a bit more sleek, and the background looks a bit nicer. And I think, the motion is a bit smoother, and, like the aliens, they'll have some 3D motion to them. Like their animations are a bit more fluid and smoother and more fleshed out. And it's, it gives tickets, and you only just play 2 levels instead of, playing for as long as you can. So it shortens it up. But it's one of those games that's still around, and it's still fun to play. I mean, it's a classic. It's simple, but there's enough complexity to it that you don't necessarily get tired of it that quickly.
I just was trying to look up, like, what's the highest score of Galaga that we've been to, and it looks like it's been over almost 21 million points as far as the highest score, which is crazy to me that it's so many, especially because our Galaga guy here right now only has 36,450, so he's a ways away.
Did you? I can't remember, Andy. Were you a big Galaga guy yourself?
Galaga I always enjoyed. I always think that I preferred Space Invaders because it was just just the slower pace of the aliens coming down at me was didn't made it a little easier, but I enjoyed both of them. They were both fun games.
It's funny, like it feels like Space Invaders and Galaga were like worlds apart, but they were only a couple of years. Like Galaga made some incredible improvements over Space Invaders and like Galaxian, but only like 2 years apart. That it's kind of, you think about the pace of innovation in games, that it was non-trivial. And I for me, I was like a Centipede guy. I loved Centipede, and also, I'm a Joust kid too. I played a lot of Joust, and I can't. What was the one where it was a 4-player? You were like, it was kind of a D&D game, 4-player on the console.
Gauntlet.
Yeah, Gauntlet. Yeah. Oh God, I loved Gauntlet.
Warrior needs food badly.
Yes. Yeah.
That was another one that they remade in like the 90s or 2000s. The Gauntlet's Legacy. It was like the 3D version.
Oh, it feels like I should find that.
Version,
yeah, that'd be fun.
Well, before we wrap up, I wanted to do the IMDb game with the two of you, with Warren Cole, who plays our carrier bridge tech. He is the Galaga guy. Warren Cole, surprisingly though, fairly robust acting career. This is, I would almost, at this point in his career, I don't know if it would be fair to call it a cameo, but or just like a fun part. Maybe he knew some of the people involved, but I mean, he's been in some things, and I don't know if either of you are familiar with him, but I wanted to do the IMDb game with Warren Cole. Any ideas?
Warren Cole.
Not by name, but like looking at his face, he kind of looks like maybe he transitioned into like a CW actor or a CW type actor.
That's actually a really good pull. He does. He looks like he's moved. He probably has more TV credits than film. How about that?
Yes, you're right there. There's a lot more TV and some video game work as well. The 4 on his IMDb known for are the TV show Shades of Blue, in which he was 35 episodes of that show. And then 6 episodes of The Following, the Kevin Bacon show.
Oh, that was Bacon, yeah.
Yep. 12 episodes of Common Law and 2 episodes of White Collar. So those are his 4.
White Collar was supposed to be good. I haven't really seen any of those. I watched a couple of episodes of The Following, but clearly not the 6 that Cole was in.
Well, most recently, he's been in 11 episodes of Yellow Jackets.
Oh, I haven't watched that either.
Yeah. So, well, here's one that you did watch. He was in 7 episodes of 24.
Yeah. I watched all of that.
It's just been a little while, but still.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's Warren Cole. And that takes us to the end of the minute. We see the night shot of the helicarrier flying through the sky, and that is the end. So let's wrap it up for today. We'll be back tomorrow to talk about Minute 57. So, Bubbawheat, tell everybody about what you're up to and where they can find it.
The project that I'm working on the most right now is my main podcast. It's Time to Rewind. I break down time loop movies and TV shows, one scene at a time. Typically, with the time loops, it's one loop at a time. I believe we're in the middle of Memento right now, which, it's not exactly a time loop movie, but it's close enough for me. I kind of explain it that the character Leonard is kind of in his own personal time loop, or like everybody is kind of in a time loop in their own, like the world is in a time loop and he's the one that keeps resetting every 10 to 15 minutes. And we're tackling that one scene at a time for 45 episodes. They come out every Monday and Thursday, and we're going in film order rather than chronological. So every Monday is the color scene and every Thursday is the black and white scene.
And we guessed on that. It's a lot of fun. We had some really fun conversations about some incredibly short scenes.
Very short. Very short.
Yeah. So we'll have
a lot of the black and white scenes are less than a minute, but I think you did. I think we talked about how you got, I think, the two shortest black and white scenes.
I think one was 11 seconds. So very, very.
But what did we talk about? We took that 11 seconds for an hour and a half, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if memory serves, something like that. Hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever.
It was
Something
pretty
like
long.
that.
Yeah. Well, we'll have the links in the show notes. You can check it out there. Remember, if you don't see the show notes in your podcatcher, just go to our website, marvelmovieminute.com, and you can find it all there as well. That's it for today. We'll be back tomorrow. So, Pete, thanks as always.
Oh, Andy, I wonder if our meet-cute scientists will discover why birds suddenly appear every time they are near, and then suddenly disappear in a white-hot ball of fire.
Until next time, true believers.
Marvel Movie Minute is a production of True Story FM, engineering by Andy Nelson. This season's music is Message to the World by Anthony Vega, and this season's show art is by Winston Yabo. Find the show at truestory.fm. If your podcast app allows ratings and reviews, please consider doing that for our show.